We need to remember that there's a difference between the beauty or the glory or the divinity within the creation and our ability to detect it. Remember, this is yet another connection between art and science. Our discussion of science led us to see that the thing that we're investigating in science, the universe, is an embodiment, a revelation of the thought, the mind of God. And we investigate it through scientific methods and inquiry, the various tools that science gives us to investigate the thoughts of God revealed in creation. Art is an investigation into that very same thing, the mind, the thoughts of God, the glory of God in creation. But just as our scientific abilities are marred by sin, our artistic abilities are as well. And so, corresponding to that threefold division of beauty that I mentioned at the very end of the last lecture, we get a threefold sort of division or stages of our detection of beauty. So prior to the fall, our ability to detect the beauty in the creation was present, but it was incomplete. And the beauty of the creation was incomplete. So prior to the fall, the beauty of the creation and our ability to detect that beauty were present but incomplete, waiting to grow and mature. After the fall, the beauty in the creation and our ability to detect it, they're both there, but now they're damaged. The beauty in the creation is diminished because of the fall, and our ability to detect the beauty in the creation is diminished because of the fall. And then after restoration, after the return of Christ, after the renewal of all things, the beauty in the creation and our ability to detect it are both present and completed. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're longing for. So I should say, with respect to the chapter that we're encountering now in our book, that I disagree with Kuyper about some of what we're going to talk about in a moment. I'll tell you where I disagree. As I said earlier, I think God is beauty itself. But I could be wrong. I might be my belief that God is beauty itself could be mistaken. Maybe Kuyper is right that beauty is primarily located in sensible or observable things and not in the spiritual realm. That its primary location is in the material. Here's something he says on page 143. Quote, "Certainly beauty exists in God, and God alone will one day bring beauty to its consummation in glory. But beauty and glory nevertheless remain characteristics of the outward appearance of things, a characteristic that can be applied only figuratively to the spirit." So I think this is wrong-headed, but it's not entirely wrong. All of the characteristics that exist in creation have a kind of more fundamental existence in God. I think this is part of the story of creation, God's providence, God's sustenance, God's governance. So what Kuyper says of beauty is just as true then of matter, of number, of weight, of goodness, of wisdom, and so on. Even the notion of the spiritual is first encountered in the created order, and then we take that and apply it to God to understand Him more fully. Created beauty points to uncreated beauty. In the same way, I think that created goodness points to uncreated goodness. That created persons point to uncreated persons. So look, even though I disagree with Kuyper a little bit on this point, I agree with most of what he has to say. And we need to be careful here. And I appreciate the care that Kuyper brings to this discussion. Beauty can be dangerous. Just think about how many people have fallen for beautiful people who turn out to be spiritually ugly. So we need to be careful here. And my disagreement with Kuyper is minor. So let's move on. I love this quote from Kuyper on page 144. Quote, "The motive for art comes to us not from what exists, but from the notion that there is something higher, something nobler, something richer, and that what exists corresponds only partially to all of this." That is fascinating, right? He's saying that we long for completed or perfect beauty. That's what we're after. So in the secular sphere, we have this ideal form of beauty, but in the Christian understanding, that ideal form of beauty, that perfected beauty, that's the perfected and glorified creation. It will come to fruition. Kuyper says again, another quote, "For us Christians, therefore, art exists in direct connection with our expectations about eternity. With trembling hand, as it were, art reaches out toward the glory that through Christ will one day fill heaven and earth." End quote. Again, just a marvelous quote about this idea that art, if you really think hard about it, is directing our attention to something more beautiful. That's what art is supposed to do. Now look, I want to say something here. I don't think that anything that Kuyper is saying suggests that you can't have art that depicts tragedy, art that depicts terribleness. I think of Picasso when I think of this. I love the work of Picasso. And I think some of what Picasso is doing is he's highlighting for us in really vivid ways the destructiveness, the mess, the disintegration of our world. But that too, actually, if you think about it, can bring about in us a longing for completion, a longing for heaven. So, all of this suggests that from a Christian perspective, all right, beauty is with us forever now. And so those who think that the afterlife is purely spiritual, they're going to end up diminishing and denigrating art. Because as Kuyper says, as Kuyper believes, art is really fundamentally related to the material. So since Christians think that the afterlife is material and spiritual, of course, it's the combo, it's the perfect integration of the material and the spiritual, then Christians think that, or should, according to Kuyper, think that art today is pointing to art in the new heavens and the new earth. So this leads to this idea that art is not mere imitation of nature. It's an imitation of God, and in particular, an imitation of the completed or perfect stage of the creation. That's the idea. So, since you and I and all humans, those made in the image of God, since we're the apex of the creation, the top of the creation, the goal of art is to reveal to us, in part, the completed or perfect stage of the human form, the human body. The human. So Kuyper, as he's putting forth this idea, right, he's telling us, look, art is to direct you to heaven. Artists, are you doing this? Pursuers of beauty, are you seeing it? Would there be art without sin? Yeah, because the original creation wasn't completed. Sin is not what gives rise to art. So art would have existed without sin. Art doesn't exist merely because of common grace or special or particular grace. Art would have existed without the need of any grace, in other words. But common grace is what allows art to continue to exist in our current state of fallenness. Otherwise, all we'd have really without common grace, we'd just perceive ugliness. There's a deep connection between all of what we're talking about and God. There's a deep connection between art as done by images of God and art, in a sense, as practiced by God. We can see this connection in terms of the making of art and God's creating the universe. God creates, and we, in our limited way, we create as well. God creates ex nihilo. Some of you have heard this, creation ex nihilo. It's God's bringing the material, visible universe into existence out of non-material. God brings it into existence out of nothing else that existed prior to it. The universe isn't a part of God. God speaks it into existence. So he creates ex nihilo, out of nothing. We don't create like that. But we create by rearranging what God brings into existence. We take the hidden powers in the creation and we bring them about. We reveal them. The creation is growing. It's a maturing thing, and we are part of helping to mature it, to reveal its hidden beauty. So art is the expression, it's the exercising of the human ability to create. And in this way, art resembles God.